What family secret was finally spilled in your family? That my parents had to get married. They always told us they got married in 1961, but it was 1962, 3 months before my sister was born. What's amusing is that my father was an accountant who was insanely fast with math. Whenever he was asked how many years they'd been married, he'd be off by 1. My mother would correct him through clenched teeth and then my father would nod and agree. I was always told by an older relative of mine that the first child in a marriage for some reason always took less than 9 months. I always found it amusing to think about that. My great-grandmother wasn't actually Mexican but rather was adopted by a Mexican family from a Chinese family who was being kicked out of Mexico when railroad construction was over. She always had more typically Asian features but only spoke Spanish and it was never really questioned. 23andMe is a hell of a thing. When my paternal grandfather died, the federal government reached out to do a state funeral. He'd been career Army and a colonel, so we didn't question it. Then the funeral came and they went all out. Huge procession, people showing up who are really big names, like heads of departments, senators, retired senators, people from the CIA and State Department. It was nuts and we were all super confused. Turns out he was a key dude in the OSI during World War II, and when the OSI splintered into the CIA and Secret Service, he went the Secret Service route. He wasn't on White House detail, but instead worked in a covered office that dealt with counterfeiting and currency. He went blind when I was a toddler and retired from the Army. For whatever reason, he told no one about all his covert work with the OSI and Secret Service, and the only person who knew, my grandmother, was sworn to secrecy and never told anyone. My father grew up thinking he was just a colonel working on base. Only after his death were we given all sorts of cool shit like publications by him, lectures given by him, and all kinds of things from various things he did and was known for. All I knew him as was a blind old man who was perpetually smoking, drinking, and being a crotchety bastard. Turns out he was a bad motherfucker and all, but none of us knew. In the 1970s, a dead girl was found on my grandpa's property. Everyone, including the local police, just assumed she was in with a bad crowd and murdered by drug dealers. In the 90s, some of his grandkids came forward about all the molestation. After that, people started to realize Grandpa probably killed that girl. Did anything happen to your grandpa? He's been dead since the mid-1980s. The victim's parents are also both dead. I know that some people have given the tip to the police department, but I don't think they're going to start reinvestigating this cold case without anything more solid than allegations. When I was 5 years old, 1988, Santa Claus left a Nintendo on our front porch. It was wrapped in newspaper, and my parents had no idea who gifted it to us. My dad, particularly, tried to figure it out. He was always suspicious that it had been a family friend. It was by far the best gift of the year, and we played it all the time throughout our childhood. My dad died in 2004. Last Christmas, my mom explained that she was the one who had bought it and surreptitiously placed it on the porch. My dad really liked to be in control of things and had forbidden the purchase. She knew better. She didn't tell a soul for 30 years. Thanks, Mom. I love this so much. I love thinking about how much joy your mom probably got watching you play with it and love it so much. 3 Happy early Mother's Day, Mom. I see a lot of stories about people finding out that who they thought was their parents weren't the people raising them, and this one is a little bit different. My dad always thought his father who raised him wasn't his bio dad, and the father thought the same. He was treated terribly by his father because the father was told he couldn't have children, and my father was born prematurely, but at a healthy weight. So, everyone assumed my grandmother had an affair and got pregnant with my dad. It was to the point that after my grandmother died, my grandfather failed to even mention to his new wife that he had a son and grandchild, me. Years later, my dad gets an ancestry DNA test for him and me. He finds out that his dad was actually his bio dad. It was shocking and sad. When she was growing up, my grandmother was told by her older siblings that she had a different father than them. They believed their mother was having an affair with a neighbor and that was my grandmother's bio father. My mom and I both took DNA tests and it matched us both with cousins from my grandmother's older siblings and with relatives from their bio dad's family. Great-grandma may have indeed been having an affair, but that didn't mean my grandmother was a product of that affair. Sadly, even after explaining all of this to her, my grandmother still refuses to believe that her parents were the same as her older siblings. My cousin is actually my sister. Apparently my mom got pregnant really young and her much older sister adopted my sister and raised her as her own. It was actually an amazing moment when we found out. My cousin, sister, and the sister I was raised with and I are really close. Just happened last year. We're all old now, I'm 50 and my cousin/sister is 58, so it's just a really neat thing that makes us all happy. That is awesome. I guess I just don't get why the secret was kept once you guys got old enough to understand the circumstances of why it happened that way. Genuinely curious. I think everyone who knew was fine to just leave it alone, but when my aunt died my cousin/sister found adoption papers that didn't list the birth mother. She started having an identity crisis and my mom, her real mom, couldn't bear to see it.